Well, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Joint Audit, Oversight, and Executive Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
If members can make their selection on their tablets. Chair, we have a quorum with 4 members present and 3 members absent.
Thank you, Clerk. All right, let's move to non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anybody who would like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of the Executive Committee or the Audit Oversight Committee. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We do. Alex Wong, please unmute yourself now. Alex,
I would like to reiterate. Yes. Good morning, MTS Board of Directors. I would like to reiterate that it is very important to maximize frequency, especially on the Mid-Coast Trolley, which serves University City, and especially with University City's new community plan update that plans to add tens of thousands of jobs and housing and residents to that area. Of course, in addition to the burgeoning ridership that we see on that line, it's going to be very important to make sure that we increase that trolley to 7.5-minute frequencies as soon as possible. Let's remember that it only takes about $3.7 million per year in order to increase Mid-Coast Trolley frequencies from 15 minutes to 7.5 minutes during rush hour. So that is going to be very important in enhancing not just travel times and shortening travel speeds, but also in helping passengers feel safe, because as you might know, 84% of Part 1 crimes on the trolley happen not on board trolleys, but rather at stations. Another thing too is that it is important for MTS to support an airport rail connection that will not only directly connect the airport of downtown with a one-seat ride, but one that is also grade separated from traffic, therefore so that it will be maximally reliable and maximally fast, and one that is not interlined. That is one that does not share tracks at all with any existing trolley lines, because once you have to share tracks with existing trolley lines, that creates a bottleneck, and that really limits capacity and frequency on existing trolley lines, especially the Green Line, which is going to need a lot more frequency, as you might know, with all the transit-oriented development in that vicinity. So to summarize, please support building an airport rail link that is completely separated from existing trolley tracks. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's move to approval of the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting of September 5th, 2024. Clerk, do we have any public comment on the minutes?
We do not.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion from Vice Chair Goebel, and we have a second from Director Frank. Any discussion on approval of the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Oh,
that motion
Chair,
carries.
Can we make the vote on the system?
I would be delighted to. All those who would care to vote, please do so on your screen.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to our discussion items. And just to note, we're going to take items 5 and 6 out of order. We're going to hear item 4, then we'll take item 6, and then we will take item 5. Item 4 is the audit results and draft of the fiscal year 2024 annual comprehensive financial report. And we are going to invite Erin Dunn to begin this presentation. Please begin your presentation whenever you're settled in and ready to go.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Whitburn. My name is Erin Dunn. I'm the controller here at MTS. I'm joined with Jennifer Pentney, who's our assistant controller, and Coley Delaney, who is the partner from the Poon Group, who was in charge of our audit this year. We are going to discuss the audit that we had from August until just a few weeks ago, highlight some key financial indicators, and answer any questions you might have regarding the ACFR. So, Coley.
Thanks, Erin. All right, can we go to the Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry. There we go. All right, cool. All right, yeah, so as Aaron mentioned, my name is Coley Delaney. I'm a partner with the Poon Group, and I'm the engagement partner for MTS's 2024 financial statement audit. I'm going to go over some required communications regarding management's and auditors' responsibilities, do a brief overview of the financial statements, highlight some pension and OPEB information, and then I will deliver the audit results. So, starting with management's responsibilities for this annual comprehensive financial report. Management is responsible for the preparation and the fair presentation of the financial statements, and that is to be in accordance with US GAAP. Management is also responsible for designing, implementing, and maintaining internal controls relevant to the preparation and fair presentation of those financial statements, and in order to make sure that those are free from material misstatement, whether that is due to fraud or error. In preparing the financial statements, management is also required to evaluate whether there are conditions or events that raise substantial doubt about MTS's ability to continue as a going concern for 12 months beyond the financial statement date. And obviously that is not an issue for MTS this year. As far as our responsibilities as the auditors, we are responsible for forming and expressing an opinion about whether these financial statements are free from material misstatement and are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in the US. We plan to perform our audit to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance about whether these financial statements are free from material misstatement. And we are also responsible for considering internal control over financial reporting. However, those considerations are solely for the purpose of determining our risk assessment and audit procedures, and we do not provide assurance on MTS's internal controls. We're also responsible for exercising professional judgment and maintaining professional skepticism throughout the audit. We're responsible for identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatement on the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error. Again, that's to help determine our risk assessment and our audit procedures and not to provide assurance. We also evaluate the appropriateness of the accounting policies used and the reasonableness of significant accounting estimates made by management that are included in those financial statements. And then ultimately, we are also responsible for concluding whether in our judgment, MTS has the ability to continue as a going concern. Going into the brief overview of the financial statements, so we'll start here with the summary statements of net position. This is a comparative from last year to this year. This is for MTS as the primary government. So these numbers do not include the SDTC employee retirement plan. So just some quick highlights. Current assets saw a $27 million increase in cash and investments. The decrease in non-current assets was due mainly to depreciation on capital assets. As far as deferred outflows are concerned, pension-related deferred outflows decreased by $6.9 million this year. For current liabilities, they increased mainly due to unearned revenues increasing by $16 million. For non-current liabilities, those increased by $4.2 million due to increases in claims and pension liabilities of $7 million and a decrease in the OPEB liability of $3 million. For deferred inflows of resources, lease-related deferred inflows increased by $18.6 million this year due to new lessor leases by MTS, and net position increased by $80 million from last year. This is the summary statements, basically the summary income statement. Operating revenues saw an increase in passenger revenues this year of $4.9 million, and small changes in miscellaneous and advertising revenues made up the rest. For non-operating revenues, those saw federal revenue decrease by $5.3 million, and state of good repair funding decreased by $7 million, but increases in state revenue and Transnet funds helped to offset those other losses. For operating expenses, the increase of $44 million was due mainly to about $16 million increase in personnel costs and $29 million increase in outside services. But energy costs this year did fall by $8 million compared to last year as well. And capital contributions are similar year over year, and non-operating expenses increased by $16 million due to a loss on disposal of capital assets of $16.9 million. Here's as far as cash flows are concerned, operating, so this includes receipts from customers, payments to suppliers and employees, and payments for claims. This decreased $32 million in 2024 versus 23, as cash paid to suppliers and employees increased by $26 million. For non-capital financing, this includes public support, which would be your federal grants, like TDA funds, STA, Transnet, et cetera. Cash flows increased here by $22 million in 2024 versus 2023. For capital and related financing activities, there was an increase in cash outflows this year of a decrease in the cash outflows this year of $85 million, and that was mainly due to spending on capital asset additions, jumping from $69 million in 2023 to $162 million in 2024. As far as cash flows from investing activities, that shows basically just interest received on investments. That increased in 2023 or in 2024 versus 2023 due mainly to MTS's increased cash and investments balances. So overall cash equivalents of $34 million in increased $34 million in 2024 compared to $123 million increase in 2023. On to this is the summary statements of fiduciary net position. So this is for the SDTC employee retirement plan. The assets are made up solely of plan investments, and those increased $9.6 million this year. The liabilities consist of amounts due to MTS, the plan sponsor, and some other miscellaneous payables. So for the year, net position increased by $9.8 million. This is the summary statements of changes in fiduciary net position for the plan. Again, the contributions increased by about $1 million. Those are actuarially determined by the plan's actuaries. Net investment income in 2024 consisted of $9.2 million in realized and unrealized gains, plus $5.2 million of dividend earnings. Distributions to plan participants increased slightly, and overall that ended with a positive change in net position of $9.8 million versus a positive change of $6.3 million in 2023. There's just a couple pension and OPEB items just to kind of point out. The net pension liability that is on MTS's books this year at June 30, 2024 is $229 million. That's the aggregate number there that's highlighted in the gray. Those numbers are estimates based on actuarial inputs, and so those are subject to change. And so what this table does is sort of show you that if all things were equal, and the discount rate input were to be changed into the calculation of your liability, this is the swing that would happen on a 1% decrease in that rate or a 1% increase in that rate. And so what you can see here, even though the CalPERS plans are at a different rate than the STTC plan and the SDTI PARS plan, but if those were to drop, say, a 1% decrease, the aggregate liability for MTS would jump from $229 million to $308 million. So it's just something that we point out. This is a footnote in the ACFR, and it just shows you that this liability is very subject to these actuarial inputs. Pension expense, year over year, broken out by plan. This year's total pension expense increased by $2.2 million, $36 million total compared to $34 million last year. This is similarly to the changes. This is a sensitivity for OPEB instead of pension. So right now, the MTS's aggregate OPEB liability is $39 million. With a 1% decrease, would jump up to 46. And I will point out that unlike in pension, where changes to the discount rates are planned out and basically that they're coming, the OPEB liabilities change. That discount rate changes every year based on an average of municipal bond index rates, and that is because since MTS does not actually have any set aside plan assets for their OPEB plan, so they are subject to these changes in these rates every year. OPEB expense this year, however, did decrease from $2.5 million to $1.4 million this year. And lastly, this is the results of the federal single audit. So as an entity that expends in excess of $750,000 of federal funds per year, MTS is required to have a federal grant audit, referred to as the single audit. So this year, MTS expended total almost $186 million of federal awards. The majority of that, about $184.5, is made up of the federal transit cluster funding. And so that was the major program that we tested for compliance this year, and that covered 99% of MTS's total federal expenditures. So as far as audit results, we issued an unmodified opinion, which you would refer to as a clean opinion. And so what that means is that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. The significant accounting policies have been consistently applied. Any estimates used in the creation of those numbers are reasonable, and that the disclosures are properly reflected in the financial statements. As far as other results, we had no disagreements with management. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls noted, and no accounting issues were noted as well. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and we'll open it to questions or comments.
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Okay. We will now open committee member discussion on this item. The motion will be to accept the report. Any discussion? If there's no discussion on that, we will go ahead and vote on the recommendation, which is to accept the report. And you should have that up on your screen momentarily. Go ahead and vote on that. I suppose that would be helpful, wouldn't it? All right. Director Elo Rivera has made the motion and Director Frank has seconded it. Please vote.
The motion passes with 4 members voting yes and 3 members absent.
Thank you, Clerk. All right, we're going to go to item 6 since it dovetails on the information that we just heard. Item 6 is the fiscal year 2024 final operating budget results, and Gordon Meyer is going to present this presentation. And please feel free to begin once you're set to go.
Good morning. My name is Gordon Meyer. I'm the manager of financial planning here at MTS. So this morning, I'm going to provide the final report on the FY24 operating budget results for our fiscal year that just ended in June of 2024. This one? Yeah. So first, we'll take a look at the operating revenue performance for the year. So fair revenue, we finished 2.2 million unfavorable to budget, or 2.9%. Even though we finished unfavorable to budget, we were up over the prior year by 4.9 million, or 7.2%. Driving that year-over-year increase was favorable ridership, where we were 7.2 million passengers higher than last year, which was up 10.5%. Partially offsetting that was a decrease in our average fare, where we actually ended the year at 96 cents, where we were at 99 cents the year before, which was an unfavorable variance of about 3%. Next line, we have other operating revenues. So here we finished the year favorable 3.4 million, or 10.8%. This was a couple different things. We had favorable interest revenue, rental income, and then we also sold 2 land parcels last year, one in Santee and one on Fairmont Avenue, that generated some additional operating revenue for us. For a total of 2.1 million. We'll come back to that at the end, but in total, we finished the year 3.4 million favorable for those other operating revenues. So overall operating revenue, we came in at just under 107 million for the year, which was 1.2 million favorable to the budget. So moving on to expenses. So personnel costs, we finished the year favorable by 1.5 million, or 0.8%. Couple of things going on here. So we had favorable cost recovery within trolley operations. Specifically, we had some costs within trolley maintenance work orders that got reclassed to the emergency cost centers at year end. We received reimbursement for those since through insurance and FEMA funding, so that helped out our actual operating budget. And then we also had favorable paid absences within bus operations. Next, we have purchase transportation. So that's our paratransit and fixed route contract. So overall, we came in favorable 1.3 million. On the fixed route side, we had favorable performance bonuses. So anytime the contractor misses their KPIs, we get a credit on our invoice. If they exceed them, we pay a bonus out. And so we were favorable on that line. And then for paratransit, we didn't hit the service levels that we budgeted, specifically on the third party portion of our contract where taxis operate some of their paratransit service. Other outside services, we finished the year unfavorable by 544,000. That was unfavorable legal costs within our administration expenses, and then repair and maintenance costs within our LRV maintenance department also trended high for things like graffiti, major repairs, etc. The major variance, which was really good news this year, was in energy. So we finished the year favorable 3.6 million or 7.4%. That's all related to the commodity prices for both electricity and CNG. And we had a crazy year in FY23 a couple of years ago. In the first half of FY24, we saw the commodity prices still remain well above historical norms. The second half of FY24, we saw it coming down steadily and approaching our more typical $2 to $3 commodity price for CNG. It's continuing into this year as well, but overall really good news, and we hope that continues. Other expenses were favorable, 554,000 for the year. That was favorable risk management costs, and we also pushed out some desktop and laptop purchases in our IT department to FY25, which caused a variance in FY24. So overall operating expenses for FY24 came in at 408 million, which was 6.4 million favorable to our budget. So here you can see our operating activities combined. So we finished the year with a favorable net operating variance or income of 7.6 million. So that's our operating activities that are directly related to operations. The other piece of our overall MTS operating budget is non-operating activities, which is primarily subsidy revenue. So before I get into the performance there, I wanted to give a brief description of the categories. So we have federal funds, which is our recurring FTA funds for preventive maintenance and rural operations. Those are all formula funds. We have our federal stimulus funds. That was the CARES Act and ARP funds, where we received 360 million in total. We've received most of that, and we're going to draw the remaining 50 million in FY25. Transportation Development Act, or TDA, that's the 0.25% of the regional sales tax that's assessed in the region, and it's administered by both Sandag and the county. Transnet, that's the 1/2 cent sales tax in San Diego County to fund transportation projects specifically. So we receive a large formula share of that that's based on sales tax cash receipts. And then we also receive a direct reimbursement for the net cost of Transnet funded operations from Sandag, which includes our BRT as well as our Midcoast operations. And then state transit assistance, that is the state sales tax on diesel fuel. That's a formula share that we receive every year. And then Senate Bill 125 TIRCP, I think everyone's familiar with this one. It caused a lot of headache last budget season. But that's the $4 billion in state TIRCP funding that for the first time was distributed based on a formula. And just, I think everyone's aware, but we did receive that first payment in September. We started spending it. We're moving forward with our plan, so good news there. So here you can see the actual performance for these categories. So federal recurring, we were 326,000 unfavorable to budget. That was mostly on the rural operations funding. We weren't able to draw as much based on our eligible expenses, and so we saw a dip there. TDA and Transnet were very close to budget. Really the significant variance here was the state transit assistance. So here we typically include 11.3 million in our operating budget. It's usually a static number and the rest goes to capital. We brought that down to 8.4 million during the mid-year amendment last year because the most recent projection from the governor in the governor's budget was going to be a sharp reduction there. The final sales tax receipts came in higher and our overall cash payment was higher. And so we put that favorable variance back into the operating budget, and that's why we saw that pickup. SB 125, we were able to spend the $4.5 million that we had in the budget, last year's budget. And I also just want to highlight too, the $85 million in stimulus funding. We were able to draw all of that exactly on target with budget. So overall subsidy revenue was favorable by 1.3 million, or just under 0.5% for the year. So the other non-operating activities are our reserves and debt service. So on the reserves, we budgeted a contribution, an overall contribution of 30.4 million, which is mostly the operating deficit reserve contribution. So we budgeted 30.2 million going to the operating budget deficit reserve, and we were able to contribute exactly that. We also have reserves for the For-Hire Vehicle Administration and the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railroad departments. Those are much smaller. We were able to contribute a little more in those two departments, so that's why we had that higher contribution that was 106,000 higher than what we had budgeted. And then debt service expenses, small variance. The only reason I want to highlight that is because FY24 was the last year that we'll have a debt service line in our budget, because we did the final payment on the pension obligation bonds. So that line will be disappearing from here on out. And then so bottom line, non-operating activities, which is mostly the subsidy revenue, was favorable by 1.2 million, or just under 0.5% to budget. And so on this slide, you can see our overall operating budget performance, including a look at our structural deficit, as well as our bottom line favorable number for the year. So you can see our final FY24 figures. Recurring revenues were 357 million. Our total expenses were 408 million. So we ended the year with an actual structural deficit of 50.2 million. So that was about $9 million better than what we had projected in the budget. So good news there. Do want to point out that even though it is good news, when we add back in all the SB 125 stuff and we start looking outward again, we still are projecting to hit the fiscal cliff in FY28. So all good news is good news, but it doesn't move the needle much in terms of what's coming down the pipeline. In order to get to our overall variance for the year, we need to add back in the non-recurring items. So we have our reserve contribution of 30.5 million. Then the 85 million in stimulus funds, and then our 4.5 million in SB 125 funding. With those included, we had a favorable final number for FY24 of 8.8 million. And so that brings us to the question of what do we do with that 8.8 million? So that I wanted to remind the board of our contingency reserve policy. So the target is set at 12.5% of the operating expense budget. So for FY25, after backing out Transnet funded activities, our target is 49.7 million. And so we currently have a balance of 45 million prior to any action by the board. And so we need about 4.7 million to get to our 12.5% target. As we just discussed, we had 8.8 million in excess revenue over expenses for FY24. We need to do an interest adjustment every year where we move some of that interest that was earned to some of those other self-funded activities. So the For-Hire Vehicle Administration and the SD&AE department. So after that adjustment, we have 8.4 million. And so the staff recommendation for the allocation is to allocate the 2.1 million in land proceeds sales to the FY26 CIP for programming. The reason for that is that it's one, it was generated by the sale of capital assets, and two, it's very non-recurring in nature. So generally, we recommend moving those kind of spikes to the CIP. We also recommend moving an additional 2.5 million of that to increase the liability insurance self-insured retention from 5 million to 7.5 million. So in FY24, when we were negotiating our new liability insurance premiums, the premiums went up astronomically. And so in order to keep that monthly premium lower, we had to increase our self-insured retention amount. And so anytime we increase that self-insured retention, we like to put that money into a reserve so it's planned on and it's available in case it needs to be spent. So that is the recommendation there. And then that leaves 3.8 million that we could allocate to the contingency reserve. So allocating 3.8 million there would put us at 48.8 million or 12.3% of the FY25 operating budget. So short of our 12.5% target. However, we have 87 million in our operating deficit reserve currently. And so we have much more than 12.5% available in reserves for the operating budget. And then just wanted to highlight the fact that FY24 was the last year that we'll be contributing to the operating deficit reserve, and beginning in FY25, we'll start spending down the reserve. So the clock is starting to tick now on hitting the fiscal cliff here in a few years. And so that brings me to the final staff recommendation that the executive committee forward a recommendation to the board of directors to approve the allocation of excess revenues over expenses in FY24 to the following: 2.1 million in land sale proceeds to the MTS CIP for programming in FY26, 2.5 million to increase the SIR from 5 million to 7.5 million in accordance with the general excess liability insurance program, and then allocate the remaining 3.8 million to the contingency reserve. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Clerk. Do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Okay, we'll open it up to committee member discussion on this item. There is no discussion. Do we have a motion on the staff recommendation?
No, I think, did you have, oh, okay.
I need to do it through here. It's so moved, staff recommendation.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Goebel to approve the staff recommendation. Do we have a second? We have a second from Director Elo Rivera. Clerk, please call the roll.
The motion passes with 4 members voting yes and 3 members absent.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to item 5 now, and that is the operational budget status report for September of 2024. And Gordon Meyer is going to provide us with this update as well.
All right, this one is very short and sweet. So this is here. We wanted to give an update on the first quarter of FY25 results, so July through September. So first, operating revenue. So fair revenue so far, we're trending very close to budget, 40,000 favorable through the first 3 months, or 0.2%. We saw really good signs in July and August. We averaged 9.2% year over year in revenue growth. September, we saw a dip to only 3.4% higher than last year. So overall, we're trending about 7.2% higher than last year, which is very close to what we budgeted. So we'll continue to watch that. We have a few more months of data that we'll get before we actually need to amend the budget here in March. Ridership, we're seeing really positive signs, at least in July and August. We don't have September data yet, but we're actually trending 16% year over year in July and August. However, offsetting that, we saw a pretty big dip in average fare where we're trending 5.8% lower than last year. So we're hoping that with the new fare enforcement changes going into effect in February, that we'll see that decrease in average fare pick up. But that's how things are looking right now. Overall, very close to budget. Next line, other operating revenue, trending a little unfavorable here so far. That's in energy credit revenue and advertising, small variances. And so we think we can make that up. But overall story on revenues is very close to budget so far, less than about 0.1% unfavorable variance. On the expense side, we have some larger variances that are trendworthy. So on the personnel side, we're about $1.5 million favorable so far, or 3%. There's a couple things going on here. So in the last year, we budgeted adding 47 new positions related to security. That was mostly code compliance inspectors, supervisors, dispatchers, and we've hired a lot of them, but we're not where we projected we would be in the hiring. So we're seeing savings on the wages there as we continue to make headway with the hiring. Right now, we're projecting to be fully hired at roughly in January. So we will start to see that variance tighten up on the security hiring. We also, last year, we added 15 flagging positions, which were part-time, mostly to ramp up for the SB 125 Orange Line Rehabilitation Project. That's not going to start construction likely until the beginning of FY26. So we budgeted for this additional headcount, but we really don't need it right now. And so that will likely continue to see favorable variances as well and bring that down at the mid-year amendment. And then the next two things highlighted here under personnel, we have favorable defined contribution costs within San Diego Transit, and our health and welfare costs are also favorable. So we had put in estimates in last year's budget based on some of the proposals for the collective bargaining agreements that were being negotiated, and we were assuming that those were going to be finalized early, but those existing contracts run out in December, at the end of this December. And so we built in extra funding with assumptions that we were making, but those are still being negotiated, and we likely won't see that additional expenses come to fruition until January or whenever those are finally executed. Next line, purchase transportation, very close to budget on both the fixed route and paratransit side, so we don't need to cover anything there. Other outside services, unfavorable, $343,000. The other noteworthy variance that we see right now is energy, and so we're 1.2 million favorable, or almost 9%. Same story that I mentioned in the last presentation. The commodity rates were back down to $2-3 on the CNG side, which is awesome news, and we'll definitely be adjusting the budget, at least for the commodity rate, downward in the upcoming mid-year amendment. So overall, operating expenses are favorable by a little over 2 million so far, just about 2%. So good news so far. Overall, we're 2 million favorable, or 2.4% favorable so far, and hoping it continues. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you again. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Okay. We will open committee member discussion on this item. This is an informational item, so no motion is necessary. And seeing no committee discussion, let me just congratulate the team on strong financial performance so far, as well as a good audit report. So thank you for all the good work there. Item 7 is the review of the draft agenda for next week's board meeting. Any questions on the draft agenda? Seeing none, do we have any staff or committee member communications? Seeing none, the executive committee's next meeting date will be December 12th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned.